7.3 Determine budget. Determine budget is a process of aggregating the estimated costs of individual activities or work packages to establish an authorised cost baseline. The key benefit of this process is that it determines the cost baseline against which project performance can be monitored and controlled. This process is performed once or at predetermined points in the project. A project budget includes all the funds authorised to execute the project. The cost baseline is the approved version of the time phase project budget, which includes contingency reserves but excludes management reserves. And you can read more about that on the PMBOK guide, page 248. Determine budget inputs. Number 1. Project management plan. The project management plan components include the cost management plan. This describes how the project costs will be structured into the project budget. For example, there could be a limit on the budget payable in a period or upon reaching a certain milestone. Resource management plan provides information on rates for personnel and other resources, estimation of travel costs and other foreseen resourcing costs that are necessary to estimate the overall project budget. The scope baseline. The scope baseline includes the authorised project scope statement, the work breakdown structure baseline and the work breakdown structure dictionary baseline. This will include details for cost estimation and management. Input number 2, project documents. Examples of project documents that can be considered as inputs for this process include the basis of estimates. As with any estimates, you need to record details of how it was arrived at. This proves that you took reasonable care to make the cost as reasonable as possible, or I should say to make the cost estimate as reasonable as possible, and this information can possibly protect you in the event of an audit. Cost estimates. The estimation for all activities are aggregated, or in other words, added up or rolled up to give cost estimates for work packages. Project schedule includes planned start and finish dates for the project's activities, milestones, work packages and control accounts. This enables you to split costs by calendar period. Risk register. You need to check this to make sure that the estimated costs for the risk responses have been included. For example, you have 3 machines that are identical and they're critical to the project's success. These machines have one common component that has a low chance of failing, but if it does fail, it would have a very high impact on the organization, on the project. It would be too expensive to have 3 components in the store, but it would take 2 weeks to buy a new component in. So a decision may have been made to mitigate the risk by having 1 spare component in the store, and you'll need to factor in the cost of this component for your budget calculation. Input number 3, business documents. The business documents that can be considered as inputs to this process include the business case. The business case identifies the critical success factors for the project, including financial success factors. The benefits management plan. Benefits management plan includes the target benefits such as net present value calculations, time frame for realizing benefits, and the metrics associated with the benefits. What is net present value? It means the value of a future asset, income or cost in today's terms. For example, a product which the project will produce in 1 year's time will have a value in 1 year's time of $1,100. But if suppose the interest rate's 10%, that means in today's terms the product would be worth $1,000. So the value in 1 year will be $1,100, but the net present value, or NPV, is $1,000. Input number 4, agreements. These are contracts and other formal arrangements for products, services or results that have been built or will be purchased for the project and need to be included in the budget calculations. Number 5, enterprise environmental factors. In fact, there's only one here. The environmental enterprise factor, which can influence the estimate cost process on large-scale, long-term, multi-country projects, is the exchange rates. Input number 6, organizational process assets. The organizational process assets that can influence the determined budget process include estimating formal and informal costs, budgeting related policies, procedures and guidelines, historical information and lessons learned repository. Cost budgeting tools. and reporting methods. Determine budget, tools and techniques. Tools and technique number 1 is expert judgment. Expertise should be considered from individuals or groups with specialised knowledge or training in the following topics: previous similar projects, information in the industry discipline and application area, financial principles and funding requirements and resources. For example, the project may be self-funded by the organisation, funded by equity in company shares, or funded by debt, which means borrowing the money. Funding by debt is actually quite a common method used by small companies and startup companies because they don't really have the assets they can use to borrow against. Tools and techniques number 2, cost aggregation. Cost estimates are aggregated by work package, planning package and control accounts in the work breakdown structure. When you have estimates for all control accounts, you can add them to get an estimate for the whole project. But note carefully that you can aggregate costs at planning package level or control account level only if you have decomposed all the way down to work packages and have estimated the activities for the control account. This means that in rolling wave project management you will need an alternative, which would be less accurate of course, method for estimating the control accounts which has not been fully decomposed yet. Tool and technique number 3, data analysis. A data analysis technique that can be used with determined budget process reserve analysis, which can establish the management reserves for the project. Management reserves are an amount of the project budget withheld for management control purposes and a reserve for completely unforeseen work, called unknown unknowns, very hard to say, or unknowable unknowns. So really unforeseen work that is within the scope of the project. The management reserve is part of the overall project budget and funding requirements, but for the exam, remember, it is not included in the cost baseline until it has actually been used to fund the unforeseen work. Tool and technique number 4, historical information review. Reviewing historical information can assist in developing parametric estimates or analogous estimates. Historical information may include project characteristics, i.e. parameters, to develop mathematical models to predict total project costs. Such models may be simple, for example, residential home construction is based on a certain cost per square foot, per square metre, per square yard or wherever, or complex. For example, one model of software development uses multiple separate adjustive factors, each one which has numerous points within it, which is meaningless gobbledygook, but just take that some types of estimating can be very complex. Both the cost and accuracy of the analysis and parametric models can vary widely, but are most likely to be reliable when historical information used to develop the model is accurate, parameters used in the model are readily quantifiable, and models are scalable such they will work for large projects, small projects or phases of a project. Tool and technique number 5, funding limit reconciliation. The expenditure of funds should be reconciled with any funding limits on the commitment of funds for the project. For example, there may be a limit of $20,000 in any particular period, but the current plan shows that this figure will be exceeded in one or more periods. The most usual way and the most successful way to deal with this is to reschedule a project to level the costs in a similar fashion to levelling resources. Alternatively, the project manager could apply for a special exemption for the period. However, it's been my experience that's not going to be approved, except in absolutely extreme cases. Tools and techniques number 6, financing. It's common for long-term infrastructure, industrial and public services projects to seek external sources of funds because it could be millions, billions of dollars. If a project is funded externally, the funding entity may have certain requirements that the performing organisation must meet because they've got to control their risks as well. Determine budget outputs. Output number 1 is a cost baseline. The cost baseline is the approved version of the time phase project budget, excluding any management reserves which can only be charged through formal change control. As I mentioned before, the project reserves can't initially appear in the cost baseline. Payments for management reserves will appear in the cost baseline only as they are actually spent. The cost baseline is developed as a summation of the approved budgets from the different scheduled activities and a basis for comparison with actual results. Figure 7.8 illustrates the various components of the project budget and cost baseline. This is explained in page 354 of the PMBOK guide. Cost estimates for the various project activities along with contingency reserves for those activities are aggregated into their associated work package costs. The work package cost estimates along with any contingency reserves estimates for the work packages are aggregated into control accounts. The summation of the control accounts make up the cost baseline. For projects that use earned value management, which we will cover in the next lesson, the cost baseline is referred to as the performance measurement baseline. Management reserves are added to the cost baseline to produce the project budget. Any changes warranting the use of project management reserves arise. The change control process is used to obtain approval to move applicable management reserve funds to the cost baseline. Since the cost estimates that make up the cost baseline are directly tied to the scheduled activities, this enables a time phase view of the cost baseline, which is typically displayed in the form of an S-curve, which you will see illustrated in figure 7.9. Output number 2, project funding requirements. Total funding requirements and periodic funding requirements, for example quarterly or annually, are derived from the cost baseline. The cost baseline will include projected expenditures plus anticipated liabilities, but as mentioned before, the cost baseline won't include payments from management reserves until they are spent. The reason for this is that management reserves, as I've mentioned a number of times before because it is very important, are for unknown unknowns or unknowable unknowns or unplanned work, and therefore they cannot be anticipated. In fact, they may never actually be required. However, the cost baseline and management reserves are both included in the total funds required. Funding often occurs in incremental amounts. It may not be evenly distributed, which appears as steps in figure 7.9. Output number 3, project document updates. Project documents that may be updated as a result of carrying out this process include cost estimates, project schedule. Estimated costs for each activity may be recorded as part of the project schedule. The risk register. New risks identified during the process are recorded in the risk register and managed using the risk management process. That brings us to the end of determined budget. The next lesson is 7.4 control costs. Please read the corresponding chapter in the PMBOK guide before watching the video, and please read it twice or 3 times because there's lots of mathematics in that for the earned value management technique, and it would be good to get some sort of a grip on it before you start watching the video.